I was standing in this main conference room during our quarterly all-hands meeting when Bradley Morrison stepped up to the podium with that smug grin I had grown to despise. The CEO's 26-year-old son adjusted his expensive tie and cleared his throat dramatically. "I just got promoted," he announced to the room of 60 employees, his voice dripping with arrogance. The applause was polite but lukewarm. Then his eyes found mine across the crowded room, and my stomach dropped. He pointed directly at me and declared, "Tamara Jenkins is fired effective immediately to set an example of our new leadership standards." The room fell dead silent. "During my internship under you, you always bullied me," he continued, putting on the most pitiful face I had ever seen. My coworkers started whispering frantically around me. I felt every pair of eyes boring into my soul. Instead of screaming or crying like he probably expected, I simply replied, "Thank you." Then I walked out with my head held high. Walking to my car in the parking garage, my mind raced back to 2 years ago when this nightmare first began. I was a senior marketing coordinator, then ambitious and eager to prove myself at Morrison Industries. When Bradley was assigned as my intern for his summer program, I thought it would be a straightforward mentoring opportunity. How wrong I was. From day one, Bradley Morrison was everything you would expect from a spoiled rich kid who had never faced real consequences. He strolled into the office at 10:30 on his first morning wearing wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my weekly salary. While other interns scrambled to make good impressions, Bradley acted like he owned the place, which technically his family did. "Sorry I'm late," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Traffic was brutal coming from the yacht club." I bit my tongue and handed him his orientation packet, determined to be professional despite his cavalier attitude. The first week set the tone for everything that followed. Bradley would arrive late, leave early, and spend most of his time on personal phone calls. When I assigned him to research competitor marketing strategies, he submitted a presentation that was clearly copied and pasted from 3 different websites. The fonts didn't even match. "Bradley, this looks like it came directly from marketingtoday.com. I said gently, showing him the obvious plagiarism. "Let's talk about how to properly research and cite sources." He shrugged like it was no big deal. "Everyone does it. It's not like this stuff matters anyway." That attitude permeated everything he touched. When I asked him to organize client files, he stuffed them randomly into cabinets. When he was supposed to attend team meetings, he would show up unprepared and spend the entire time texting. The other interns started avoiding him after he made inappropriate comments about Sarah from accounting's appearance and asked Jenny from human resources if she wanted to grab drinks and see what happens. I documented everything meticulously. Every late arrival, every missed deadline, every uncomfortable interaction. I held weekly coaching sessions with Bradley, setting clear expectations and offering constructive feedback. I even arranged for him to shadow other department heads to broaden his experience. "You're being way too hard on me," he complained during our 3rd week together. "I'm learning the business from the ground up. My dad says that's what matters most." "Your dad hired me to teach you professional skills," I replied calmly. "That includes punctuality, accountability, and respect for colleagues. These aren't negotiable standards." Bradley's expression shifted to something darker. "You know who my father is, right?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Still, I refused to lower my standards. When other supervisors asked how he was progressing, I gave honest assessments. When Bradley submitted a client proposal filled with basic errors and unrealistic projections, I sent it back for revision rather than letting it reach senior management. That's when things escalated. Bradley started complaining to anyone who would listen that I was picking on him unfairly. He told other employees that I had personal issues with his family and was taking it out on him professionally. He claimed I gave him impossible tasks and unreasonable deadlines while favoring other interns. Marcus Chen, one of my colleagues, pulled me aside during the 6th week. "I don't know what Bradley's been telling people, but some folks are starting to ask questions about your management style." My heart sank. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you're being too tough on him because he's the boss's son. Whether you're trying to make him fail to prove some kind of point." I showed Marcus my documentation. The coaching notes, the clear expectations I had set, the examples of Bradley's work compared to other interns. Marcus shook his head in amazement. "This kid is completely unprofessional," he said. "But people don't see this side. They just hear his complaints." The final straw came during week 7 when Bradley was assigned to help with a client presentation. He was supposed to create charts showing market trends for our biggest account. Instead, he submitted hand-drawn sketches that looked like a middle school project. When I asked him to redo the work properly, he exploded. "This is ridiculous!" he shouted loud enough for half the office to hear. "You're impossible to please. Nothing I do is ever good enough for you." Susan Walsh, the intern coordinator, came running over to see what the commotion was about. Bradley immediately shifted into victim mode, his voice becoming shaky and wounded. "She's been targeting me since day 1, he told Susan, his eyes actually welling up with tears. "I try so hard, but she finds fault with everything. I think she resents my family's position in the company." I remained calm and professional, but inside I was furious. Here was a young man who had been given every advantage in life, crying fake tears because someone finally held him accountable for substandard work. The next day, Bradley called in sick. The day after that, he submitted a formal complaint to Human Resources, alleging that I had created a hostile work environment. He claimed I had made disparaging comments about his father, given him assignments designed to make him fail, and excluded him from team activities. I spent 3 hours in HR explaining my side of the story. Fortunately, I had my detailed documentation and several colleagues backed up my account of events. The investigation concluded that I had acted appropriately, but the damage was done. Bradley's internship ended 2 weeks early when he simply stopped showing up. Officially, he received a satisfactory rating because I didn't want to create unnecessary drama for CEO Richard Morrison, who seemed like a decent man caught between his company's needs and his son's shortcomings. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is take the high road," Susan advised me. "Let his work speak for itself." I thought that was the end of it. Bradley disappeared back to college, and I threw myself into my career with renewed determination. Over the next 2 years, I earned promotion after promotion through hard work and genuine results. I led successful marketing campaigns that brought in millions of dollars in new business. My team respected me. Clients trusted me, and senior management recognized my contributions. I should have known Bradley Morrison would eventually return to cause more trouble. Rich kids like him always do. But sitting in my car after being publicly humiliated, I realized something important. I had kept every piece of documentation from his internship. Every email, every coaching note, every witness statement. They were all stored safely in my personal files, waiting for the right moment. That moment, I now understood, had finally arrived. The drive home from Morrison Industries felt surreal. 20 minutes earlier, I had been attending what I thought was a routine quarterly meeting. Now I was unemployed, publicly humiliated, and trying to process the most shocking professional betrayal I had ever experienced. My phone started ringing before I even reached the freeway. The first call was from Kevin Turner, a fellow marketing manager who had witnessed the entire spectacle. "Tamara, what the hell just happened in there?" Kevin's voice was filled with disbelief. "That was completely insane. Nobody saw it coming." "Your guess is as good as mine," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Bradley apparently decided today was payback day." "But that's not how any of this works," Kevin protested. "He can't just fire people on a whim during company meetings. There are procedures, documentation requirements, HR protocols." The second call came from Jamie Rodriguez in accounting. "Girl, I am so sorry about what happened. That whole thing was wrong on every level. Half the room looked like they wanted to punch that kid in the face." By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had received calls from 7 different colleagues expressing shock, outrage, and support. The consensus was clear: Bradley's behavior had been unprofessional and potentially illegal. But sympathy wouldn't pay my mortgage or salvage my reputation. I spent the first hour at home resisting the urge to immediately fight back. Every instinct screamed at me to call the local news station, blast Bradley on social media, or march back into that office demanding justice. Instead, I made a cup of tea and forced myself to think strategically. My laptop was still logged into the company email system, access that wouldn't expire until tomorrow morning. Before doing anything else, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I started researching Bradley's activities since returning to Morrison Industries 6 months earlier. What I found was disturbing but not surprising. Bradley had been systematically positioning himself for rapid advancement through his father's influence rather than earned merit. He had been given a cushy analyst position despite having no relevant experience. Within 3 months, he was promoted to department coordinator. Last month, he had been named Assistant Director of Operations. Each promotion came with glowing performance reviews that seemed disconnected from reality. His project reports were filled with buzzwords and empty phrases. His team leadership scores were consistently low, but somehow his overall ratings remained high. It was obvious that someone was managing his career trajectory very carefully. I called my mentor, Patricia Goldman, who had retired from the corporate world 3 years earlier, after 30 years as a senior executive. Patricia had guided me through every major career decision since we met at a women's leadership conference. "Tamara, slow down and tell me exactly what happened," Patricia said, after I had breathlessly recounted the day's events. I walked her through the entire situation from Bradley's disastrous internship to today's public firing. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Here's what you need to understand," she said when I finished. "This young man has made a serious tactical error. He allowed emotion and personal vendetta to override business judgment. Smart leaders don't create public spectacles when dealing with personnel issues." "But he's the CEO's son," I protested. "He can probably do whatever he wants." "That's where you're wrong," Patricia replied firmly. "Being the owner's son makes his behavior more problematic, not less. Board members and investors don't appreciate family drama affecting business operations. Public terminations without proper documentation expose the company to significant legal liability." She recommended that I contact David Reeves, an employment attorney who specialized in wrongful termination cases. "Don't wait," she advised. "Document everything while it's fresh in your memory. Time is critical in these situations." That evening, I reviewed my employment contract carefully. Morrison Industries had very specific procedures for employee termination, including written warnings, improvement plans, and HR documentation. None of those steps had been followed in my case. The wrongful termination clauses seemed directly applicable to my situation. I also began organizing the documentation I had kept from Bradley's internship. The files painted a clear picture of a young man who was unprofessional, entitled, and vindictive when held accountable for poor performance. If he was now claiming that I had bullied him, the evidence would tell a very different story. Around 9 o'clock, I received a text message from Marcus Chen. "Check your email, something you need to see." I logged back into the company system and found a message that made my blood run cold. Bradley had sent a celebratory email to what appeared to be his college friends, not realizing that his company account was synced to the global address list. The subject line read, "Revenge is sweet." The message was even worse. "Finally got rid of the bitch who tried to ruin my reputation during my internship. Publicly fired her in front of the whole company today. Should have seen the look on her face when I told everyone how she bullied me. Dad's been wanting to clean house anyway, so this kills 2 birds with 1 stone. Planning to get rid of a few other people who think they can disrespect the Morrison family. This place is about to learn who really runs things around here." I screenshot the email immediately, then forwarded it to my personal account. This was exactly the kind of evidence that could transform my wrongful termination case into something much more significant. But the email also revealed something terrifying. Bradley wasn't finished. He was planning to target other employees who had crossed him. His public firing of me wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was the opening move in a broader campaign of workplace intimidation and retaliation. I thought about Jamie Rodriguez, who had questioned one of Bradley's expense reports last month. I thought about Kevin Turner, who had politely corrected Bradley's presentation during a client meeting. I thought about all the hard-working professional employees at Morrison Industries who might become victims of Bradley's vindictive crusade. That's when I realized this situation was bigger than just my personal grievances. Bradley Morrison was a serious threat to everyone at that company. Someone needed to stop him before he destroyed more careers and undermined everything Richard Morrison had built. Someone needed to stand up and fight back. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me. Bradley had made a critical mistake by firing me publicly and then bragging about it in writing. He had given me the tools I needed to expose his pattern of abusive behavior and protect other potential victims. Tomorrow I would start building a case that would end his reign of terror once and for all. David Reeves's law office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's business district. I arrived 15 minutes early for our morning appointment, carrying a briefcase filled with documentation and a head full of determination. David turned out to be exactly what Patricia had promised: sharp, experienced, and absolutely ethical. He was probably in his mid-40s with graying temples and the kind of calm confidence that comes from winning difficult cases. His office walls were covered with framed articles about employment law victories and testimonials from grateful clients. "Patricia Goldman speaks very highly of you," he said as we shook hands. "She also mentioned that you might have one of the most clear-cut wrongful termination cases she's encountered." I spread my documentation across his conference table, the detailed notes from Bradley's internship, yesterday's email confession, witness contact information, and my employment contract. David examined everything methodically, occasionally asking questions or making notes. "This is remarkably thorough," he said after reviewing the internship files. "You documented everything in real time with specific dates and witness statements. That's exactly what we need to establish a pattern of vindictive behavior." He was particularly interested in the email Bradley had sent to his friends. "This demonstrates clear retaliatory intent," David explained. "He admits that firing you was motivated by personal grievance rather than legitimate business reasons. The fact that he plans to target other employees suggests a pattern of workplace harassment." We discussed the strength of my case under both state and federal employment laws. David explained that public termination without proper documentation could constitute defamation, especially when combined with false allegations of professional misconduct. "The challenge isn't proving wrongful termination," he said. "The challenge is deciding how aggressively to pursue this. We could settle quickly for monetary compensation, or we could build a comprehensive case that addresses the broader pattern of abuse." I didn't hesitate. "I want to build the comprehensive case. Bradley Morrison is going to destroy that company and hurt innocent people if someone doesn't stop him." David smiled approvingly. "That's what I was hoping you would say. Cases like this aren't just about individual justice. They're about protecting workplace integrity and preventing future victims." He outlined his investigative strategy. First, we would interview other employees who had interacted with Bradley both during his internship and since his return. Second, we would examine his personnel file and performance reviews for inconsistencies. Third, we would research whether other employees had been terminated or disciplined in questionable circumstances. "I'll be honest with you," David said. "Taking on the CEO's son is going to generate serious pushback. Richard Morrison will hire the best corporate defense team money can buy. This could get ugly before it gets better." "I understand the risks," I replied. "But someone has to hold Bradley accountable for his behavior. If not me, then who?" David spent the next hour explaining the legal process, potential timelines, and realistic outcomes. He estimated that building a solid case would take 60 to 90 days, assuming we could gather sufficient witness testimony and documentary evidence. "There's something else you should know," he said as our meeting was winding down. "I've been contacted by someone who claims to have inside information about Bradley Morrison's recent activities. She wants to meet with both of us, but she's insisting on complete confidentiality." My heart started racing. What kind of inside information? She wouldn't say over the phone. Only that she has evidence of misconduct that goes well beyond wrongful termination. She's agreed to meet tomorrow evening at a location outside the city. I left David's office feeling cautiously optimistic. For the first time since yesterday's humiliation, I felt like I had a real chance to fight back effectively. The legal framework was solid, the evidence was compelling, and now there was the possibility of additional support from an unexpected source. That afternoon, I started reaching out to former Morrison Industries employees who might be willing to share their experiences with Bradley. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Lisa Park, who had worked in human resources until last year, called me within hours of receiving my message. "I can't believe someone is finally taking action against that kid," she said. "I have stories that would make your hair curl." Robert Wells, a former project manager, was even more direct. "Bradley Morrison is a cancer in that organization. I left because I couldn't watch him destroy everything we had worked to build." By the end of the day, I had spoken with 8 former employees who described a pattern of behavior that was far worse than I had imagined. Bradley hadn't just been unprofessional during his internship. He had been systematically abusive, vindictive, and destructive throughout his entire relationship with the company. More importantly, several of them mentioned incidents involving financial irregularities and questionable expense reports. Robert Wells specifically mentioned seeing Bradley submit invoices for vendor services that seemed suspiciously overpriced. I tried to bring it to the CFO's attention, Robert explained, but Margaret Steinberg told me that all Morrison family expenses were handled directly by the CEO's office. She seemed uncomfortable discussing it. As I prepared for tomorrow's mysterious meeting, I realized that my wrongful termination case might be just the tip of the iceberg. Bradley Morrison's problems went far deeper than workplace harassment and unprofessional behavior. The question was, how deep did this corruption go, and who else was involved in covering it up? The coffee shop was an hour outside the city, tucked away in a small town where nobody would recognize either of us. David and I arrived first, choosing a corner booth that offered privacy and a clear view of the entrance. At exactly 7 o'clock, a woman in her early 30s walked through the door, scanning the room nervously before approaching our table. "Janet Morrison," she said, simply extending her hand. I nearly choked on my coffee. Bradley's older sister was nothing like I had expected. Where Bradley was entitled and theatrical, Janet was composed and professional. She wore a simple business suit and carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from real accomplishment rather than inherited privilege. "I know what you're thinking," she said as she sat down. "Why would Richard Morrison's daughter want to help destroy his son? The answer is complicated." Janet explained that she had worked at Morrison Industries for 6 years after college, starting in entry-level positions and earning promotions through genuine merit. She had been groomed as a potential successor to her father, learning every aspect of the business from manufacturing to client relations. "I love that company," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "My grandfather built it from nothing. My father expanded it into what it is today. I wanted to carry on that legacy." Everything changed when Bradley returned from college 2 years ago. Initially, Janet had tried to mentor him the same way she had been mentored. She offered guidance, shared industry knowledge, and helped him understand the family business. But Bradley didn't want to learn, she continued. He wanted shortcuts. He wanted immediate authority without earning respect. When I tried to give him constructive feedback, he accused me of being jealous and threatened to turn our father against me. The situation escalated when Janet discovered irregularities in Bradley's expense reports. He had been submitting invoices for vendor services that either didn't exist or were grossly overpriced. When she brought her concerns to their father, Richard dismissed them as sibling rivalry. "That's when I realized the cancer had already spread too far," Janet said bitterly. "Dad was so desperate to believe Bradley could change that he was willing to ignore obvious warning signs." Janet shared documented evidence of Bradley's financial misconduct, fake invoices, inflated expense reports, and unauthorized payments to vendors that turned out to be shell companies. The amounts were staggering, totaling nearly $200,000 over 18 months. But the money wasn't for business expenses, she revealed. Bradley has a serious gambling problem. He's been using company funds to cover debts to illegal bookmakers. She showed us bank records proving that the fraudulent payments had been deposited into accounts controlled by Bradley or his associates. The paper trail was clear and damning. "I've been documenting everything for over a year," Janet explained. "I kept hoping Dad would come to his senses and intervene before Bradley destroyed everything we've built. But it's only gotten worse." The harassment settlements were particularly disturbing. Janet had evidence of at least 3 female employees who had received financial payments in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements about Bradley's inappropriate behavior. "The company lawyers have been quietly cleaning up his messes," she said. "Sexual harassment, workplace bullying, financial irregularities. They've managed to keep everything under wraps, but the costs are mounting." I asked why she was willing to expose her own brother now. "Because yesterday's stunt proves he's completely out of control," Janet replied. "Publicly firing you was reckless and vindictive. It exposed the company to massive legal liability for no legitimate business reason. I can't watch him destroy everything our family has worked to build." Janet revealed that several board members had been quietly expressing concerns about the company's direction under Bradley's increasing influence. Theodore Blackwell, the longest-serving board member, had specifically questioned why a 26-year-old with no relevant experience was being fast-tracked for senior leadership positions. "The board doesn't know about the financial misconduct yet," Janet said, "but they're starting to ask uncomfortable questions about Bradley's qualifications and judgment." David asked about Janet's relationship with her father and whether she was prepared for the family consequences of exposing Bradley. "My father is a good man who's been manipulated by a master manipulator," she answered. Bradley learned early that tears and victim playing could get him out of trouble. Dad's biggest weakness is his inability to admit that his son is fundamentally flawed. The most shocking revelation came near the end of our meeting. Janet produced security footage showing Bradley entering my office after hours the night before he fired me. I had a feeling he was up to something, she explained. So I asked Harold Wright, our security chief, to pull the footage. Bradley was in your office for 37 minutes, going through your files and computer. The footage was crystal clear. Bradley could be seen photographing documents from my desk, copying files from my computer onto a flash drive, and taking materials from my filing cabinet. He was stealing my work to claim credit for upcoming presentations. The board presentation you were scheduled to give next week, Janet asked. Bradley's planning to deliver it himself, claiming it was his strategy all along. The client proposal is worth $15 million in potential revenue. I felt sick to my stomach. Not only had Bradley fired me publicly to satisfy his personal vendetta, but he was also planning to steal my work to advance his own career. The level of corruption and vindictiveness was beyond anything I had imagined. There's more, Janet continued. I have evidence that this isn't the first time Bradley has stolen work from terminated employees. It's become his standard practice. Identify talented employees who might challenge his authority, find excuses to get rid of them, then claim credit for their contributions. David was furiously taking notes, clearly recognizing that we now had evidence of a much larger pattern of misconduct. This wasn't just wrongful termination anymore. This was fraud, embezzlement, and systematic workplace abuse. I need you to understand something, Janet said as our meeting concluded. Coming forward with this information will destroy my relationship with my father and probably end my connection to the family business forever. I'm willing to make that sacrifice because someone has to stop Bradley before he ruins more lives. She handed David a flash drive containing all her evidence, financial records, harassment settlements, board communications, and security footage. Use this to build the strongest possible case. Make sure Bradley faces real consequences for his actions. As we prepared to leave, Janet made one final request. When this goes public, please remember that not everyone in the Morrison family is like Bradley. Some of us still believe in integrity, accountability, and treating people with respect. Driving back to the city, I realized that my simple wrongful termination case had transformed into something much larger and more significant. We now had the evidence and inside support needed to expose a pattern of corruption that threatened the entire company. Bradley Morrison's reign of terror was about to come to a very public end. David wasted no time putting Janet's evidence to work. Within 48 hours of our clandestine meeting, he had coordinated with financial investigators to examine the extent of Bradley's embezzlement scheme. The numbers were even worse than Janet had initially revealed. The forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Catherine Mills, discovered that Bradley had been systematically siphoning company funds for nearly 2 years. The fake vendor payments were just one piece of an elaborate financial fraud that included inflated travel expenses, phantom consulting fees, and unauthorized equipment purchases. This young man has stolen over $400,000 from his own family's company, Catherine reported during our meeting at David's office. He's been clever about spreading the theft across multiple budget categories to avoid detection. Meanwhile, I was working my own investigation by reconnecting with former colleagues who had witnessed Bradley's behavior firsthand. The stories that emerged painted a picture of workplace toxicity that extended far beyond my own experience. Michael Santos, who had worked in the operations department until recently, described an incident where Bradley had publicly berated a junior employee for questioning his project timeline. The kid was just trying to point out that Bradley's schedule was unrealistic, Michael explained. But Bradley went ballistic, screaming about respect and authority. The poor guy was so shaken up that he requested a transfer to a different department. More disturbing was the pattern of female employees being targeted for harassment and intimidation. 3 different women described incidents where Bradley had made inappropriate comments about their appearance, suggested that their promotions were based on factors other than merit, or created hostile work environments when they refused his advances. "He's smart about it," explained former marketing coordinator Amy Foster. "He never does anything that would be obviously illegal. But he creates this atmosphere where women feel constantly uncomfortable and undermined." The harassment allegations were particularly significant because they suggested that Bradley's behavior toward me wasn't personal retaliation for his internship experience. It was part of a broader pattern of targeting women he perceived as threats to his authority. David's investigation also revealed troubling information about Bradley's escalating paranoia since my termination. Several current employees had reported that he was asking suspicious questions about their conversations with former colleagues and making veiled threats about loyalty to the Morrison family. Kevin Turner called me with disturbing news about Bradley's recent behavior at work. "He's been going through people's desks after hours," Kevin whispered during our phone conversation. "Security footage shows him in different offices looking through files and computer records." The theft of my presentation materials was just the beginning. Harold Wright, the security chief, had quietly documented multiple instances of Bradley entering offices without authorization, copying files and removing documents. He was systematically gathering intelligence on potential threats to his position. "Harold's getting nervous about covering for Bradley," Kevin continued. "He's been keeping detailed records of everything, but he's worried about his own job security." The breakthrough came when David arranged a private meeting with Margaret Steinberg, the company's chief financial officer. Margaret had been increasingly uncomfortable with the financial irregularities she was being asked to overlook, but she had been reluctant to challenge Richard Morrison directly. "I've been with this company for 12 years, Margaret explained during our confidential meeting. "I've never seen anything like what's been happening since Bradley returned. The financial controls that we've maintained for decades have been systematically undermined." She provided additional evidence of Bradley's fraudulent activities, including internal memos, where she had raised concerns about questionable expenses. Richard Morrison's responses showed a pattern of dismissing legitimate financial oversight in favor of protecting his son. "Richard's a good man," Margaret said sadly, "but he's got a massive blind spot when it comes to Bradley. He's convinced that tough love will eventually turn his son around, but meanwhile the company is bleeding money and losing good employees." The most shocking discovery came from the security footage analysis. Catherine Mills and David had been reviewing Harold Wright's comprehensive surveillance records when they noticed something alarming. Bradley hadn't just been stealing company funds for gambling debts. "Look at these timestamps," Catherine pointed out, showing us footage from multiple nights over the past 6 months. Bradley's been in the office after hours accessing confidential client files and financial records that are far beyond his authorization level. The pattern suggested that Bradley was planning something much larger than simple theft. He was gathering sensitive information that could be used to manipulate client relationships, insider trading, or corporate espionage. "This isn't just embezzlement anymore," David said grimly. "This could be securities fraud, corporate espionage, or worse. We need to move quickly before he causes irreparable damage." Janet Morrison proved to be an invaluable ally in understanding Bradley's broader strategy. During a second secret meeting, she revealed that Bradley had been pressuring their father to remove certain board members who might oppose his eventual succession. "He's been systematically identifying anyone who might challenge his authority," Janet explained. "Board members, senior employees, anyone with institutional knowledge who might question his decisions. Your termination was just the first move in a larger power consolidation." The evidence was mounting rapidly, but David warned that we needed to be extremely careful about timing our revelation. "Bradley's getting desperate," he observed. "Desperate people make increasingly reckless decisions. We need to be prepared for him to escalate his behavior when he realizes we're building a case against him." That warning proved prophetic sooner than we expected. The next morning I received a call from Jamie Rodriguez with urgent news. "Tamara, you need to know what happened at work yesterday," Jamie said, her voice shaking with anger. "Bradley called an all-hands meeting and basically threatened anyone who's been talking to former employees. He said that sharing confidential company information with outsiders could result in immediate termination and legal action." The intimidation campaign was expanding. Bradley was now openly threatening current employees who might support my case or provide testimony about his misconduct. He was transforming the workplace into an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. "But here's the thing," Jamie continued. "A lot of people are getting fed up with his behavior. The meeting backfired because it made everyone realize how paranoid and controlling he's become. David decided it was time to accelerate our timeline. We have enough evidence to proceed," he announced, "but we need to act before Bradley causes more damage or intimidates additional witnesses." The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Harold Wright, the security chief, finally decided to break his silence and provide David with comprehensive documentation of Bradley's after-hours activities. "I can't stay quiet anymore," Harold explained during a tense meeting at David's office. "This kid is going to destroy the company, and I refuse to be complicit in covering up his crimes." Harold's evidence included not only security footage, but also detailed logs of Bradley's access to various offices, the specific files he had viewed, and the materials he had removed. It was a complete record of systematic theft and corporate espionage spanning nearly 2 years. The most damaging footage is from last week, Harold revealed. Bradley spent 3 hours in the CEO's office going through confidential board communications and strategic planning documents. He photographed everything. The implications were staggering. Bradley wasn't just stealing money and harassing employees, he was conducting corporate espionage against his own father's company, gathering intelligence that could be used for insider trading or sold to competitors. As we prepared for the final confrontation, I reflected on how far this case had evolved from my initial wrongful termination complaint. We were now dealing with embezzlement fraud, harassment, intimidation, and corporate espionage. Bradley Morrison wasn't just a spoiled rich kid with anger management issues. He was a criminal who posed a serious threat to everyone around him. The time had come to bring him down. David scheduled the formal meeting for Friday morning at 10 o'clock in Morrison Industries' main conference room. The same room where Bradley had publicly humiliated me just 3 weeks earlier would now serve as the venue for his own reckoning. The attendees list read like a corporate drama cast: Richard Morrison, the Board of Directors, Company Legal Counsel, Thomas Burke. Chief Financial Officer Margaret Steinberg, and notably absent was Bradley himself, who had been told only that there was an important company meeting requiring his presence. I arrived with David 30 minutes early, carrying 3 briefcases filled with evidence that would systematically dismantle everything Bradley had built through lies and manipulation. My hands were steady, my mind was clear, and my heart was ready for justice. Richard Morrison looked exhausted as he entered the conference room. The past 3 weeks had clearly taken their toll on him. Board members filed in with grim expressions, having been briefed that they would be hearing allegations of serious misconduct involving a senior family member. Bradley strutted in 5 minutes late, wearing his usual confident smirk and expensive suit. He clearly expected another routine corporate meeting, where his opinions would be solicited and his authority would be reinforced. The shock on his face when he saw me sitting at the conference table was almost comical. "What is she doing here?" Bradley demanded, pointing at me with obvious agitation. "This woman was terminated for cause. She has no business attending company meetings." David stood up calmly and introduced himself. "My name is David Reeves, and I represent Ms. Jenkins in a wrongful termination and workplace harassment case against this company. We're here today to present evidence of systematic misconduct that poses serious legal and financial risks to Morrison Industries." The color drained from Bradley's face, but he quickly regained his composure. "This is ridiculous," he protested to his father. "She's obviously trying to shake us down for money because she can't accept being fired for poor performance." "Mr. Morrison," David addressed Richard directly, "I think you'll find that the evidence we're about to present tells a very different story, one that involves embezzlement, fraud, harassment, and corporate espionage spanning nearly 2 years. David began with the financial evidence, methodically walking through Catherine Mill's forensic accounting analysis. Each fraudulent transaction was documented with bank records, fake invoices, and corresponding gambling debts. The total theft exceeded $400,000. Bradley's attempts to deny the allegations became increasingly desperate as the evidence mounted. Those were legitimate business expenses, he claimed. "Sometimes you have to invest money to make money." "Including payments to illegal bookmakers?" David asked, producing bank records showing direct transfers from shell companies to known gambling operations. Margaret Steinberg was asked to verify the financial records. Her testimony was devastating for Bradley, confirming that she had repeatedly raised concerns about questionable expenses and had been told to process payments without proper documentation. "I was specifically instructed that all Morrison family expenses were to be approved without standard oversight," Margaret testified reluctantly. "I was told this came directly from the CEO's office." Richard Morrison's face grew pale as he realized the extent of his son's deception. "Margaret, are you saying that Bradley was using company funds for unauthorized personal expenses?" "Sir, based on the evidence presented today, it appears that way. I should have pushed harder for proper documentation, but I was told that questioning family member expenses could jeopardize my position." David then moved to the harassment allegations, presenting testimonies from multiple female employees describing Bradley's inappropriate behavior, intimidation tactics, and creation of hostile work environments. Amy Foster's recorded statement was particularly powerful. Bradley Morrison made it clear that my career advancement depended on my willingness to tolerate his inappropriate comments and suggestions. When I complained to my supervisor, I was told that making waves about the CEO's son could affect my job security. Bradley's denials became more frantic as each piece of evidence undermined his credibility. "These women are obviously coordinating their stories," he claimed. "They're jealous of my success and trying to bring down the Morrison family." Eleanor Vance, the board chairwoman, interrupted Bradley's protests. "Young man, these are serious allegations with substantial documentation. I suggest you listen carefully before responding." The security footage was the final nail in Bradley's coffin. Harold Wright presented comprehensive evidence of Bradley's after-hours activities, stealing files, accessing unauthorized computer systems, and photographing confidential documents. "This footage shows systematic corporate espionage," Harold testified. Mr. Morrison accessed files containing client information, board communications, and strategic planning documents far beyond his authorization level. Bradley's composure finally cracked completely when the footage of him in my office was displayed on the conference room screen. There was no denying what the video showed: deliberate theft of my work product to claim credit for my contributions. "You can't use that footage," Bradley shouted desperately. "It was obtained without my consent. This whole thing is a setup." Thomas Burke, the company lawyer, looked deeply uncomfortable as he reviewed the legal implications. "Mr. Morrison, the evidence suggests potential criminal liability for embezzlement fraud and corporate espionage. The company faces significant exposure to civil lawsuits and regulatory action." That's when Janet Morrison entered the conference room, her presence causing audible gasps from several board members who recognized her immediately. "Hello, Dad," she said quietly, taking a seat at the conference table. "I'm sorry it's come to this." Richard Morrison looked like he had been punched in the stomach. "Janet, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to provide testimony about Bradley's misconduct and to present additional evidence of his criminal activities," she replied professionally. "I've been documenting his behavior for over a year, hoping you would intervene before it reached this point." Janet's testimony was devastating. She corroborated every aspect of the case against Bradley while providing additional evidence of his manipulation and abuse of family relationships. "Dad Bradley has been systematically stealing from the company, harassing employees, and undermining everything you've worked to build," she said with tears in her eyes. "I tried to protect the family by handling this privately, but his behavior toward Tamara proved that he's completely out of control." Bradley's response was pure rage and desperation. "She's lying," he screamed. "Janet's always been jealous that Dad was grooming me to run the company instead of her. This is all about sibling rivalry." "The bank records don't lie," Eleanor Vance said coldly. "The security footage doesn't lie. The witness testimonies are consistent and well documented. Mr. Morrison, your son has committed serious crimes against this company and its employees." Richard Morrison sat in stunned silence as the full scope of Bradley's deception became clear. The son he had protected and defended was a criminal who had been systematically destroying everything the Morrison family had built. "Bradley," Richard said, finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "is any of this true?" For a moment I thought Bradley might confess and show genuine remorse. Instead, he doubled down on his lies and entitlement. "I don't care what these people say," he declared defiantly. "This is our family's company. I was protecting our interests from disloyal employees and incompetent management. Everything I did was for the good of Morrison Industries." Thomas Burke immediately recommended Bradley's termination and criminal referral to law enforcement. "The company cannot retain an employee who poses this level of legal and financial risk," he advised. "We need to demonstrate that Morrison Industries takes these allegations seriously." Eleanor Vance called for an immediate board vote on Bradley's termination. The vote was unanimous 6-0 in favor of immediate dismissal for cause with no severance or benefits. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, "I recommend that the board initiate a comprehensive review of corporate governance policies to prevent similar incidents in the future." Richard Morrison finally found his voice. "Tamara," he said, looking directly at me, "I owe you a profound apology. My failure to address Bradley's behavior enabled him to cause tremendous harm to you and other employees." He paused, clearly struggling with the weight of his decisions. "I would like to offer you a position as Director of Marketing with a significant salary increase and full authority to rebuild the department culture. I also want to discuss appropriate compensation for the harm you've suffered." David nodded approvingly. "We appreciate Mr. Morrison's acknowledgement of responsibility. Ms. Jenkins will consider the offer carefully contingent on the implementation of comprehensive reforms to prevent future harassment and retaliation." Bradley was escorted from the building by security, his career in shambles and criminal charges pending. As I watched him leave in handcuffs, I felt a profound sense of vindication and relief. Justice had finally been served. 6 months later, I stood in my new corner office on the 14th floor of Morrison Industries, looking out at the city skyline and reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought me to this moment. The nameplate on my desk read, "Tamara Jenkins, Director of Marketing and Employee Advocacy," a title that perfectly captured my dual role in rebuilding the company's culture and driving business results. Bradley Morrison's legal troubles had continued to escalate after his termination. The district attorney's office had filed multiple felony charges, including embezzlement fraud and corporate espionage. His gambling debts had been even larger than we initially discovered, totaling over $600,000 to various illegal operations. The criminal trial had been a media sensation, with local news outlets covering every detail of the spoiled heir who had stolen from his own family's company. Bradley's attempts to portray himself as a victim of family politics had been thoroughly discredited by the overwhelming evidence of his crimes. He had ultimately pleaded guilty to avoid a longer prison sentence, receiving 4 years in state prison and orders to pay full restitution to the company. The restraining orders filed by multiple former employees ensured that he would never again be able to intimidate or harass the people he had victimized. Justice served. As Patricia Goldman had said when we celebrated at dinner last month, sometimes takes time, but it's always worth the wait. The transformation at Morrison Industries had been remarkable to witness. Richard Morrison had taken full responsibility for his failure to address Bradley's behavior and had implemented comprehensive reforms to ensure it never happened again. The new employee protection policies were among the most progressive in the industry. Anonymous reporting systems, independent investigation procedures, and zero-tolerance policies for harassment and retaliation had created a workplace culture where people felt safe to speak up about problems. Culture change doesn't happen overnight, Richard had told me during one of our weekly leadership meetings, but it starts with acknowledging past mistakes and committing to do better. Janet Morrison's return to the company as Chief Operating Officer had been transformational. Her combination of business acumen, ethical leadership, and deep understanding of company operations made her the natural choice to lead the organization's recovery and growth. "Having you and Janet working together has been one of the best decisions I've made," Richard confided. "You're both proof that real leadership comes from integrity and competence, not family connections or political manipulation." My new role had exceeded every expectation I had held for my career trajectory. Beyond managing marketing operations, I had been tasked with developing and implementing employee advocacy programs that protected workers from harassment and retaliation. The success had been measured not just in improved employee satisfaction surveys, but in concrete business results. Our team had developed innovative marketing campaigns that brought in record revenues, including the $15 million client proposal that Bradley had attempted to steal. "Your strategy presentation was brilliant," the client had said during our successful contract signing. "The authentic focus on customer value rather than corporate profits really resonated with our board." The personal satisfaction of mentoring young professionals had become one of my favorite aspects of the job. Sarah Williams, a recent college graduate who joined our marketing team, reminded me of myself at that age, ambitious, talented, and eager to prove herself in the corporate world. "You've shown me that standing up for what's right doesn't have to end your career," Sarah had told me during her 3-month review. "It can actually make your career stronger and more meaningful." The relationship with David Reeves had developed naturally after the legal case concluded. Our shared commitment to justice and professional integrity had created a foundation for personal connection that surprised us both. "I've handled hundreds of employment cases," David had said during our first dinner date, "but I've never met someone who approached injustice with such strategic thinking and genuine concern for others. Our weekend hiking trips had become a cherished routine, providing balance and perspective after intense weeks of corporate leadership and legal advocacy work. The speaking engagements had started small with local professional organizations requesting presentations about workplace harassment and ethical leadership. But word had spread quickly about the Morrison Industries case, and I was now receiving invitations from national conferences and corporate training programs. "Your story resonates because it's about more than personal vindication," said conference organizer Linda Chen after my presentation to the National Association of Female Executives. "It's about systematic change and protecting other people from similar harm." The most rewarding speaking engagement had been at my alma mater's business school, where I addressed graduating students about integrity, courage, and standing up for professional values. "Success isn't just about climbing the corporate ladder," I had told the enthusiastic audience. "It's about climbing the ladder in a way that makes the workplace better for everyone who comes after you." Patricia Goldman, my mentor and friend, had been invited to join Morrison Industries' board of directors, bringing decades of experience in ethical corporate governance and employee advocacy. "You've become the kind of leader I always hoped you would be," Patricia had said after her first board meeting. "Someone who uses success as a platform for protecting and empowering others." The company's financial recovery had been swift and impressive. Eliminating Bradley's theft and mismanagement had freed up resources for legitimate business investments. Employee retention rates had improved dramatically as word spread about the cultural transformation. "Turns out that treating people with respect and dignity is actually good for business," Richard had observed with characteristic understatement during our quarterly review. The most satisfying outcome had been seeing other employees find their voices and speak up about problems without fear of retaliation. The anonymous reporting system had identified and addressed multiple workplace issues before they escalated into serious problems. Kevin Turner had been promoted to senior marketing manager and had become a close colleague and friend. "You changed everything about how this company operates," he had told me recently. "People actually believe they'll be supported if they do the right thing." The legal settlement with Morrison Industries had been substantial, reflecting both the severity of the wrongful termination and the company's commitment to making amends. But the money had been less important to me than the institutional changes that would protect future employees. "Financial compensation can't undo the harm that was done," David had explained during the settlement negotiations, "but it can demonstrate that actions have consequences and encourage better behavior going forward." I had used a portion of the settlement to establish a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in business and marketing, with a special focus on those from underrepresented backgrounds. "Creating opportunities for others is the best way to honor the support you received during your own challenges," Janet Morrison had said when she agreed to serve on the scholarship selection committee. The profound life lesson that had emerged from this entire experience was about the power of patience, documentation, and strategic thinking when confronting injustice. Immediate emotional responses rarely create lasting change, but careful planning and persistence can transform entire systems. "You taught me that fighting back doesn't mean losing control," Sarah Williams had observed. "It means choosing your battles wisely and fighting them with intelligence and integrity." The relationship with my family had deepened as they witnessed my professional growth and personal resilience. My younger sister Emma, who was just starting her own career, had been particularly inspired by the example of standing up for professional values. "I always knew you were strong," Emma had said, "but watching you turn such a negative experience into positive change for other people has been incredible." The transformation had extended beyond Morrison Industries as other companies began implementing similar employee protection policies. The case had become a model for how organizations could address workplace harassment while maintaining business operations and family relationships. "Corporate America is watching how this plays out," David had noted during a recent conference where we presented together. "Your case has become a template for addressing nepotism harassment and financial misconduct in family-owned businesses." As I prepared to leave the office on this Friday evening, I reflected on Bradley's unintentionally prophetic words from that horrible day 6 months ago. "Thank you." He had been mocking me then, but I genuinely felt grateful now for the opportunity to fight back, create change, and build something better. The young woman who had walked out of that conference room in humiliation and shock had been transformed into a leader who could protect others from similar harm. The experience had revealed strength and capabilities I never knew I possessed. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. Dinner reservations confirmed for 7:30. Looking forward to hearing about your week. I smiled as I gathered my things and headed for the elevator. Life had become richer and more meaningful than I had ever imagined possible. The painful journey through injustice had led to professional fulfillment, personal growth, and the deep satisfaction of making a positive difference in other people's lives. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create opportunities for the best things we never knew were possible. Bradley Morrison had intended to destroy my career and reputation. Instead, he had inadvertently set me on a path to greater success, deeper purpose, and more meaningful relationships than I had ever experienced. As I walked through the lobby of Morrison Industries, past the photos of company achievements and employee recognitions, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been transformed into something larger and more lasting than any individual victory. The future stretched ahead with endless possibilities for continued growth advocacy and positive change. And it all started with two simple words spoken in the face of injustice: thank you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where standing up for what's right felt impossible or too risky? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about how we can support each other in creating more ethical and respectful workplaces. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content about professional growth and workplace advocacy. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of strategic persistence when facing workplace injustice. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story, and I hope it inspires you to believe that justice and positive change are always possible when we're willing to fight for what's right.